Okay, I'll just introduce John Beveridge with his presentation on Clyde steamers inside and out.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. I've got 20 minutes, so I'm going to flee through these and hopefully something slightly different from normal, something different from me. And the title is Clyde Steamers Inside and Out. Hopefully that will be apparent as we go through the slides themselves. So the first one, for me, this is one of the nicest Clyde steamers that there's been for years. It's the Glensannox, and I was hoping to be able to say she's out of dry dock, out of Birkenhead and back sailing on the Arn route, but unfortunately she's not. However, this is the newest of the Clyde steamers. The reason I've included her is that in dry dock, she's the first Clyde steamer to have a bulbous bow. Now I know the Clansman had it, but she's not really a Clyde steamer. She's the first one to have 3 bow thrust units, and the first one to have a stern unit. Inside, we were fortunate enough last January, year past January, when the club had an excursion to the Isle of Arran on the Glensannox, and they showed us round the wheelhouse, which is bigger than this room. But it's like something like a Starship Enterprise. There's a screen for the LNG stuff, the screen for videos from all over the ship, a screen for the weight distribution of the ship, and goodness knows what else. The wheel is right in the centre of the ship in the U-shape cabinets that you can see there, and there's nobody at it. Now I was told it's on automatic pilot, which I believed, but anyway. And she's brought a whole new standard and level of luxury to the Clyde. Floor to ceiling windows that you can see out of and get a nice view. Well upholstered armchairs with table rests. She's got power points that you can plug your laptop in, your phone in, carpeting. She's airy, decoration's lovely. And the galley is bigger than my house. It's got everything they could ever want in it, and it's only got a 50-minute journey, so everybody's going to be well fed. The car deck, 5 lanes of cars, but she's also got the mezzanine floor that comes down and takes extra vehicles as well. And here she is at night time at Troon. Now that's 2025, 26. Going back, we have the Cowl leaving Rothesay in 1973, and 53, 54 were the first of the car ferries on the Clyde. And in dry dock, this is the Arran, and as John said a couple of months ago, in the 70s you could wander around the shipyards and the dry docks and nobody bothered, nobody challenged you, nobody said, you know, you're not allowed here. So it was fair game to get round and see the ships when they come out of the water, to see what they were like under the water. And this was taken in 74, the year after she got her stern loading. The props are off, the rudders are off, and you have 5 men all staring at the stern for some reason. You know, I don't know why, but they were all staring, looking at something. Now the Glensannox wheelhouse is out of Starship Enterprise. The Arrans, by comparison, you had the radar on the left, the binnacle, the wheel, a very hard stool for the captain to sit on, so he would stay awake probably, and not much else. There was a radio receiver somewhere, but pretty basic. As was the accommodation. This is the Cowl, 1972, and it's the sort of standard bus bench seats in the saloon. No decorations at all, very bland. Linoleum on the floor, not the most comfortable of ships, and you couldn't really see out very well. The car deck, well, you know, as you came down the hoist, you drove up one side, you went onto the turntable, they whisked you round, and you drove down the other side to join the queue to get back up on the hoist. Slightly different from a 5-lane Glensannox with mezzanine floor. And this is the Arran leaving Dunoon in July 76 with the Jupiter waiting to come in. And the next transformation on the Clyde was the Caledonia. This is her at Brodick in January 75 with snow on the hill. I took an instant dislike to the ship, and it's nothing to do with the ship, because my favourite steamer was the Caledonia of the paddle type. So as soon as they gave that name to a car ferry, that was it for me. I just didn't like her at all. This is her. She's at the old pier discharging passengers, and at the old new pier discharging vehicles. And in dry dock, this is what she looked like. She was the first Clyde steamer to have a bow thrust. Now, I know the Clansman had that as well, but she wasn't a Clyde steamer. So this was 74. But back in April 1970, this is her getting prepared for her entry into service. The props are off, the rudders are off, and that's them putting the name on each side of the stern in the dry dock. And she's got yellow funnels, but I think my colour scheme has come out particularly well, but they are buff funnels. And inside, she brought a whole new standard of luxury to the Clyde. Now this is Lawrence's Macduff's slide, as is the next one. This is the passenger lounge. So you've got carpets, which hadn't appeared in the Clyde before, drapes, lights, airy, individual armchairs, tables, and seats that you can see out of. And also ashtrays on every table as well, which you don't get nowadays. And this is Lawrence's other slide, which you've got the ashtrays again. But again, the floor with the carpets, individual chairs. And if you wanted something to eat, more than just a cup of tea and coffee, you had linen on the tables and crockery. And this was at the after end of the ship. Again, with views that you could see out. She had a few drawbacks. One of them was deck space, and this is her top deck, and you had to squeeze past the funnel uptakes to get anywhere on the ship. But I quite liked her colour scheme in her latter years. This is her. She was transferred, as you know, to Oban Craigenure. This is her coming back into Oban Bay in 1987. And then we come to this pair, Argyll of 2007 and the Butte of 2005, punching away over to Rothesay. And Callum Bryce, I have to thank for the next two slides as well. This is her in dry dock. And this is her azimuth unit, a fore and aft propeller in a one unit that can rotate almost 360 degrees to give her so much extra manoeuvrability. And the two guys at the bottom just give some perception to the depth of it all. And she also had stabilisers. These are retracted, unfortunately, but they do come out. So again, that's Callum's shot, so thank you, Callum. For accommodation-wise, again, a big step up to the Clyde. A lot more open areas, open plan, nice seating, armchair seating, visuals, the television cameras, and again, viewing that you can see out of windows. And so upgraded coffee cabins. I think this was introduced in the Isle of Arran, was that right, 84? But anyway, coffee cabins, lots of space. It's quite enticing to go into and get food well presented. And in her car deck, there's 5 lanes as well, but no mezzanine deck. This is her loading at Rothesay. And to show the Azipod in operation, this is her coming into Rothesay. Now, this is not a Clyde ferry talk, so I thought I would do something and show some steamers. This is the Keppel, passing the old pier at Keppel. This is 1975, and of course that pier's now been replaced by the new one. And this is her in dry dock, just coming up from London, getting the new bow, and they've started to put the wings on the bridges, on the bridge. But this is her in dry dock. And her arrival was the first of the Voss Schneider propellers on the Clyde. And this is one of the units. It's like a whisk spirling round, 3 blades that can turn direction as well. They don't always work. I was on holiday with family in Millport in July 72 when she broke down, and she was rescued by the Maid of Skelmally, towing her to Largs. And forgive the quality of this, it's not a great quality. My cameras and me didn't usually work very well at the 1970s. But this is a young David Scott giving me some perspective to the Keppel's lounge. Bench seats, no carpets, portholes you can't see out of, a very, very plain decoration, and posters stuck up with bits of sellotape. And she was the Clyde cruising steamer for 2 years, remember. But she had good deck space, very hard seats, of course. It was the buoyancy apparatus without any backs to them. I was joined by a solitary person and their dog over to Millport, and the purser is disappearing into the purser's office, which was underneath or surrounded by the uptake, which I don't think was a very comfortable place to be for too long. But this is how I like to remember the Keppel. Nice sunny day, very busy, heading out of Millport Old Pier over to Largs. And that was in 73. But she sometimes spent the night at Millport as well, and because my family were there, I was able to go down, and on the rare occasions that my time exposures worked, this is her at Millport Old Pier in July 79. And then there's the Queen Mary. This is her in September 71, 25th of September, her last weekend in operation for that year, and the Glensannocks arriving. And this is her in dry dock, triple screw and single rudder. And each of these screws had the corresponding dials in the engine room. And I think the thing says we're going full ahead at this point, but each of these dials and gauges have responded to each of the propellers. The bow view, this was in 1971, has the bow rudder slightly ajar, and also her lifeboats balancing on one of Lamont's buildings. But 2 years later, this was the view, because they did away with the bow rudder when she didn't need to sail from Glasgow anymore. Only once the Waverley started sailing, she went back up the river to Glasgow. Internally, this was her passenger lounge in 1974. In 71, they gave her a complete overhaul refit, and they introduced these theatre-style seats into the forward lounge, which were very comfortable and served well. Internally, she got a lot of rearrangements, and the restaurant ended up where the bar used to be, and these two ladies looked quite happy in doing their job. The portrait of Queen Mary, which Cunard gave Williamson Buchanan in 34, is pictured there, and the plaque to go with it to tell people why. But it's nice to see the tables set out with the silverware. And this was the cafeteria. This was moved forward? Is that where the dining saloon was? Forward? I think so. You can't make out the notice board, but the notice board does say tea 11p, coffee 16p, and fish and chips £1. And this was the promenade deck, starboard looking forward. I'm standing outside the shop. Jimmy Gibson is busy toting up the day's takings in the purser's office. But quite bland. It's all white. It's not that encouraging to explore and sit down in hard seats. So we've come a long way since then. But my ideal of the Queen Mary is this sort of picture, heading upriver on a still night, sunset, leaving Weems Bay, and a puff of smoke to show that she is a steamer. Thank you very much. That's it.
Well, good evening all. Those of you who know me well will have been expecting me to talk about Arn and the links and its links to the mainland. Having recently turned 90, I thought I would try and briefly reflect on all of the vessels that have conveyed me to and from Arn over the years. I did think of sharing with you some of the memorable excursions that I've taken since retirement, but that will have to wait for another occasion. My first sailing to Arn was in 1936, and in that year, of course, I was a babe in arms, and I have no memory of this. This was on the Atalanta, which you should see there. My parents later assured me that it was a very rough crossing, as according to them, always seemed to be the case. They regarding Atalanta as a very unstable vessel. My initial memory of sailing to Arn was during the war on the turbine Glensannox. The ship was camouflaged and painted grey, as I remember, and there we see her in wartime attire. And I have clear memories of the ship lying at Fairley Pier, and as we walked down the covered a pathway down towards the vessel, at which stage I would be about 4 years of age. Well, going back, I would be about 4 at this stage, and have clear memories of the seamen wheeling metal barrows loaded with coal from the coal trucks, which had been brought almost to the pier head to power the ship. These coal trucks are wheeled up a plank between the pier and the ship and emptied down a nearby chute fitted to the deck, and the deck and from there down into the main internal chute of the engine room bunker. The deck was then hosed to get rid of all the coal dust. I can still remember the strong smell of steam that seemed to pervade around the lower deck of the ship, and I can also remember the dark grey mottled well-worn fabric covering the seating in the downstairs lounge, and I can tell you that had an acrid smell all of its own. It was not until the end of the war that the ship was fully decamouflaged and transferred back to Ardrossan. And there we see her entering Ardrossan Harbour shortly after the end of the war. But she did continue to use Fairley Pier during the winter period, with a call at Millport en route to Brodick. Our destination was Brodick, though the ship continued on to Lumlash and then on to Whiting Bay. I don't have the Glensannox at Whiting Bay, that's the PS Caledonia. That, incidentally, was allegedly the longest pier in the Clyde at that time. I suppose that a position has now been taken by the new Brodick Pier. Now into the post-war period, at peak periods in the summer, a separate ship made the direct sailing from Ardrossan to Whiting Bay, and that was the Marchioness of Graham. She ran this service normally from about June to September. That's her actually approaching Lawrence, not at Whiting Bay. But it was a busy sailing, and they needed the 2 ships in the summer. I was quite saddened actually when Glensannox was retired at the end of 1953, and this is how I like to remember her. And talking of memories, at that same time, how many of you remember Brodick Bay with the beach huts, all the coloured beach huts, and the rowing boats for hire? And then we had the old booking office, since replaced twice and relocated. And then we had the old Winton Pier. Now, that's a photograph of Winton Pier. Winton Pier is still, you can still see it, but of course the buildings are demolished and the railway tracks have gone. And then, of course, at that time, in the 50s, we had the Isle of Man sailing. And there we have a photograph of Mona's Isle departing Winton Pier, or Drawson rather, for Douglas. With not very busy on that particular day, but it was a well-used service. Glensannock's replacement was a Marchioness of Graham, which continued the service until 1957. And there we see a Marchioness of Graham approaching Brodick, fairly busy. By this time there was clear demand for a vessel capable of carrying vehicles, and indeed, following the introduction of the Marchioness, usually one of the ABC ferries was assigned at weekends in the busy summer period, mostly the Arden. And of course we've already seen her, but there she is shortly after entering service with her goalposts at the back. She was used at weekends to deal with the vehicle demand. With continuing growth in car ownership and demand for faster freight deliveries, a larger car and commercial vehicle carrying vessel was clearly required, leading to the introduction of the MV Glensannock's in 1957. And there we see her shortly after she entered the service. This led to the demise of the cargo boat Kildonan, which we see there, which, but till then, had given a thrice weekly freight and cargo service to the island. To give an enhanced service to the island, calls to Whiting Bay were axed, and of course Lumlash had closed in 1954. This allowed an increased service between the mainland and Brodick. MV Glensannock's used Ardrossan for her daytime mainland base, but she overnighted at that time at Fairlie, which meant it was the destination of her last daily sailing and the start of her first morning sailing. Car and commercial traffic steadily built up, and that brought pressure for a drive-through ferry. MV Glensannock's regularly sailed with a full car deck and with a boat loading and unloading on the hoist. This put pressure on car time and timetable maintenance. Work therefore began at the end of 1969 to create a link span at, oh, I should have shown that. That was the Glensannock's overnighting at, well, summer nights, but at Fairlie. At the end of 1969, work began to create the old link span at Brodick, and that's under construction, and also at Ardrossan to create similar facilities which would allow for drive-through operation with a suitable vessel. Towards completion of all this, a second-hand vessel was purchased from Stena in Sweden, and of course we've already seen the old Stena Baltica, which became Caledonia. And there we see her at Ardrossan, but in CSP colours. There were a few incidents following her introduction, all mainly related to ballast, which were eventually resolved. As a vessel, I liked Caledonia, but she did suffer from class rating in that she could only carry 650 passengers in summer and 132 passengers in winter, and her winter classification was very limiting. Drive-through was clearly the answer proven by Caledonia, but with increasing demand from both domestic and commercial traffic, a bigger vessel was required, particularly for the summer period. The former Clansman, which we see there, which had been lengthened and made drive-through initially for the Stornoway service, but supplanted by Sullivan, and there's actually a photo of Sullivan in Oban Bay, not in Hebridean waters. Back to the Clansman. The Clansman was brought to the Clyde in 1976 and introduced to the Arden service to cover the busy summer period. Caledonia was moved north to cover the Oban Crignure summer service, is was said, but returned to the Clyde to cover the winter Arn service. And there we see her in winter duty at Arn, but in Calmac colours. This arrangement remained more or less in place till the introduction of the Isle of Arn in 1984, which then became the all-year-round vessel. Clansman, back to her again, initially met demand, but she suffered from the problems besetting her up north, in that she was slow and very difficult to berth in any strength of wind. So it was clear she was only a temporary solution to the Arn problem, hence the commissioning into service of the MV Isle of Arn in 1984. And there we see Isle of Arn shortly after she entered service, with the big white bow. As the all-year-round vessel, she served the route well, sailing between Ardrossan and Brodick, with weather diversions when Ardrossan was difficult to enter, to Gourock, and occasionally elsewhere. And here we see her at one of these elsewhere destinations, very unusually Weems Bay, where she discharged Arn traffic. She's been a great asset to Calmac, especially since being displaced by Caledonian Isles, the main Arn ferry, and that was in 1993. And she has since served at one or another of the Calmac network, as we all know. But growing traffic for Arn meant a bigger vessel still was required, hence the commissioning of MV Caledonian Isles, introduced in 1993. And there we see her running, that was actually crew familiarisation trials off Skelmally, and then that was her shortly after she entered service. And actually in that picture we unusually have the Fred Olsen cruise ship Black Prince, which happened to be calling on the day the photograph was taken. Caledonian Isles has proved to be a much loved vessel by the islanders, but following her annual overhaul in January 2024 was out of commission till October of last year, initially due to rust defects followed by technical problems involving propulsion units. With age catching up on her, a replacement vessel was required and revamped terminals both at Brodick and Ardrossan. Work on the new terminal at Brodick started in 2016 and was eventually brought into use in 2022. It was a relocation job as well as a big job. The reported cost was 33 million, but believe it, that was double the initial estimate. Nothing changes really as far as Holyrood's concerned. As I speak, Ardrossan Terminal, currently in the ownership of Peel Ports, remains undeveloped, though still usable by Caledonian Isles. Seamal are allegedly attempting to purchase the port's interest in the dock area. A concluded deal was reported as being on track for the end of last year, but as I speak, I don't think there's any deal concluded. We now have the recently introduced MV Glensannox serving the route, and now we have Glensannox at Brodick just shortly after she entered service. So the next picture shows her at the NATO pier at Fairlie, taken while she was undergoing crew familiarisation trials. And that might well have been a good mainland terminal for instead of Ardrossan, as there's good rail connection behind at the end of the pier, and plenty of ground to create car parking, and of course it offers better shelter. It could also have been a port of refuge for the Bute service. And I believe that Holt Leisure Parks, who are the owners, would have been willing sellers. My understanding that it wasn't considered is that the local authority opposed this because of traffic generation in the Fairlie village area. But it remains to be seen, despite the promises made, whether the money to acquire an upgrade of Ardrossan will be found, as the harbour area is not yet in the ownership of Seamal. Glensannox, until taken out of service for overhaul and warranty work towards the end of last year, it was assisted by MV Alfred. Now we see the Alfred at Brodick. under charter to Calmac from Pentland Ferries, and also operating out of Troon. Throughout last month, Alfred has worked the service on her own, but in the last week or so she's had assistance from the MV Isle of Arn. Troon lacks the infrastructure of Ardrossan, and the fervent hope of the islanders and regular travellers is that Ardrossan will be brought back into use as the approved mainland terminal. At this point I should maybe perhaps make reference to the service introduced between Fairlie and Tarbert with a call at Brodick begun in 1970 following withdrawal from service of the Gourock-Tarbert mail vessel Lochnevis. And now we have a photograph of Lochnevis actually approaching an Ellen, I think. This service was cancelled by the car ferry Cowell, but it was poorly patronised, and the service ended at the end of the summer 1971 season. So, what vessels did we see assisting during winter overhaul when the regular vessel was out of service? Well, we had most of the Clyde fleet serving at one time or another, on most of which I sailed. Vessels like PS Jupiter, she actually did winter service on the Arden Run in the early 50s, known locally in the island as Smoky Joe, and hated because she was so slow. Then we had PS Caledonia, the ABC car ferries, and here we see Arn in her new guise with a stern ramp, fresh from Bartley Curl, and that was her actually making her way to Westliff Tarbert, to the old McBrain Pier, where she was going to work from. She happened to make a call at Brodick. I'm not sure why, but I happened to be there and got the photograph. So that was her. That was a real Calmac challenge to Western ferries. Then we had Claymore. She served 1 year on the route. We had Isle of Mull, not very successful because Ardrossan was difficult for her. We had Hebrides. We had Clansman. We had Pioneer, we had Iona, and we had the partnership of Hebridean Isles and Isle of Arn, to name a few. Then on top of the above, Arn was a regular port of call in my memory for many of the Clyde excursions and also charters originating mainly from Gourock and Ayr. Some of these were the Duchesses of Hamilton, Montrose, Queen Mary, that's at Locranza, that was a CRSC charter, PS Caledonia, Marchioness of Graham on air excursion duties, Pioneer, Waverley, occasionally Jeanie Deans, and others making use of not only Brodick but also Whiting Bay and Locranza, until the closure of the two latter. An improvised pier was built in 2003 to accommodate the small Kintyre ferry overnight at Locranza on the site of the former pier, and Waverley occasionally uses this on our summer excursions. Hebridean Princess is a regular caller at Brodick at the beginning and end of our summer season of Scottish cruises. Lord of the Glens, in the same ownership as Hebridean Princess, has also been an occasional visitor. And Balmoral. And who can forget the memorable call made by Balmoral at Lamlash in 1994 on a CRSC charter round Holyloch, where she came in at high water, tied to what's left of the old Lamlash pier, the refurbished stone stump. And we've had even the Royal Yacht Britannia in. And of course, recently we had a visit from Ben McCree in October 2024, when the suitability of her servicing the Arn route on charter was being assessed. Unfortunately, the stern ramp was not sufficiently compatible with the link span at Brodick, and the proposed proposal had to be abandoned. So, what of the future? Will it be a partnership with Glen Sannox and Glenrosa later in the year, or in 2027 when Glenrosa is eventually able to enter service? or might Glen Rosa be found employment elsewhere in the network and Caledonian Isles remain on the route? Who knows? For we could spend hours in speculation and never come up with the right answer. We must therefore wait and see. Also, is Arn likely to get the money to allow redevelopment to take place, even if a purchase from Peel Ports is accomplished, or will it be given the same treatment as the promised complete duelling of the A9? Weasel words and no money. And the Arn service, what will happen there? Will it continue to be provided? Could be a partnership of Caledonian Isles and Finlaggan, because Finlaggan has already been into Ardrossan, and they could both work out the old pier at Ardrossan. Glensannox has already undergone birthing trials up north. These were considered successful, and so she could easily be deployed. It's all pure speculation, and as I said, we must wait the decision of Transport Scotland, with no doubt yet another Transport Minister with ideas of his or her own after the forthcoming May election in May. Well, just a very quick word about Sunday sailings. Arn, as you probably know, was the ground superiors were the Hamiltons, and through marriage that became, the Montroses became the ground superiors. But like all the people up the west coast, the family were very much against Sunday sailings. Public pressure forced the family to agree to the uplift of passengers needing access to the mainland on a Sunday evening. Hence the Hamilton or the Montrose making a stop at Whiting Bay in 1959 on return from the Campbelltown cruise. And that, of course, was the catalyst for Sunday sailings. For 2 years later, a stop was allowed at Lochranza, which meant that passengers could disembark at Lochranza, and there were plenty of buses to take them round to Whiting Bay, and that gave them the opportunity of spending time in Arn on a Sunday day visit. Predictably, in 1965, a return sailing from the mainland on the car ferry Glensannox was allowed, which I think 3 or 4 years later was extended to 2 return sailings, and shortly after that a full timetable of Sunday sailings was established. So, could I say in conclusion, thank you to John Newth for your help, and to David Cherry for the projection of the images, and the photographs, most of which are my own, but 1 or 2 I got from the club collection, and also from the late Ian Brown many years ago for a presentation I made in a different location. And thank you to you all for being patient listeners.
Okay, so final presenter of the evening, another real Kent face.
Thanks.
Owned the same fleece and accused me of stealing it 2 years ago. Stuart Craig with What's in a Date?
What's in a date? Thank you. Good evening. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold, so please excuse my voice. This is just a soft drink to help me along. What's in a date? I had to come up with a title. What's in a date? A big nasty stone, you might say, or the possibility of meeting your partner for life. But the date I'm referring to here is in my diary. I've kept a diary since 1989 of every sailing I've taken, whether it's in the Clyde, Loch Lomond, Western Isles. That's how I know, for example, that at the start of 2025, I've sailed on the Lord of the Isles 31 times. I've been in Finlaggan 13 times, and I've been in the Isle of Mull 51 times. I know it sounds a bit mad, there we go. I picked out the Lord of the Isles here because my most interesting sail of 2025 was on that dear old ship. This is her, I took this a few years ago, she's coming down West Loch Tarbert. Notice the nice black top to her funnels there, is he? Is he away? Is he away? Okay, right. So this was, my best sailings I thought of 2025 was on the 15th of May 2025 on the Lord of the Isles. I went to Islay. This got me thinking, what sails have I done at or around that date, going back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Well, my diary could tell me. Picking a date from all these years, anniversaries, as close to the 15th of May as possible. So last year, on the 15th of May, I sailed from Kennacraig to Port Ellen on the Lord of the Isles. I brought my bike with me, and I cycled from Port Ellen to Port Askaig and returned to Kennacraig on the Isle of Arran. The sailing from Kennacraig was at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I had to camp. I had to get there very early, so I camped at Clonig the night before. And this is the Lord of the Isles just before 7 o'clock. She was on the Isle of Run last year just for a few weeks because Finlagan was late back from her overhaul. And this was actually my first sailing the Lord of the Isles since 2018. So down West Loch Tarbert. Interesting, this is similar to John Beveridge's talk, because when the ship was very quiet and unusually I was the first allowed on with my bike. Usually you're left to stand there, but and it's quiet. I thought I'll take some internal shots of the Lord of the Isles because I don't know how much longer she'll be around. It's always quite good to have these shots because obviously the decor changes, and you know it's quite good to get a shot when there's nobody complaining about taking a picture of them. So this is me heading off just to prove I was there, and heading over to Port Ellen. I had about 3 hours to cycle from Port Ellen to Port Askaig. I would timetable was supposed to be longer than that, but the Isle of Arran had a problem with her bow visor, so she didn't call it Port Ellen during this time. She was only sailing from Port Askaig, and she did an extra run. So that suited me perfectly. So I had 3 hours to cycle from Port Ellen to Port Askaig. I had time to take the picture of both. So this is the Arran, obviously, coming into Port Askaig. And it was a lovely day. And got off at Kennacraig, back into the car and drove home. So this is Isle of Arran again at Kennacraig. So then I look back, where did I go on the 15th of May 2020? Well, the answer is nowhere. And you'll have guessed the reason, because we were in the middle of lockdown. I did manage a few sails in 2020, but a few before lockdown, and a few in the autumn. So we can quickly skip that one and head straight into 2015. I had a sailing on 2015 on the 13th of May, and this was a particularly good one. Ullapool was closed to vehicle traffic, and so the Isle of Lewis was employed to take vehicles from Stornoway to Uig. The Loch Seaforth was used to take passengers only between Ullapool and Stornoway. So again, with a good favourable weather forecast, what a great opportunity to sail on the Isle of Lewis, on a route I'd never sailed on, to Stornoway direct to Uig. So headed up to Uig with Andy Anderson. I was in the orange striped.
I remember.
You'll remember it. And we sailed over, route number 1 there, we sailed over on the Hebrides over to Tarbert, and we took a bus up to Stornoway, and we did a return sailing as foot passengers to Ullapool. That's one and only time I've been in the Loch Seaforth. And the next day, route number 3 there was Stornoway to Uig, which took about 3 hours, I think, on Isle of Lewis. I couldn't get a really decent picture of the two vessels in at Uig. This is going to be disembarked from the Hebrides. The Hebrides on the right there, and Isle of Lewis coming in. So, and as I say, we're up to Stornoway, and we had a crossing over back on the Seaforth just to say we'd done it. And then we headed off down on the Isle of Lewis. It was a fascinating day. Andy will remember. The weather was good, the sea was fine, and we sailed really close to the Sheehan Islands going down. And a flock of unusual birds passed us, Andy. What were they?
Marine skua.
What were they?
A pro-marine skua.
A Pomerine Skua. Well, I don't remember. I'm quite a keen bird watcher. This is a bird I'd never seen before, which you do get in the Hebrides.
Yes, it is.
Well remembered. So it's about half a dozen of them flew over the ship. I've just put that in because I thought you'd be here tonight, see if you remember. And Isle of Lewis coming into Uig. Just a bit taken from Angus's garden, I think.
Absolutely.
So I went back another 5 years to 2010. And yes, I took a sailing on the 15th of May in 2010, but it was only from Largs to Cumbria and back again. And I've, do you know what? Familiarity breeds contempt. I've searched everywhere for a picture of the Loch Shearer. The only one I could find is when I took at Largs when the Butte was in a few years ago. It was in 2010. So I sailed all with my wife in the Loch Shearer. That was what I did in the 2010 year. So then moved to 2025. The closest sailing to the 15th of May when the 2005 was on the Waverley. It was an evening Clyde River Steamer Club charter from Largs to Brodick and up the northeast coast of Ireland. Somebody might remember it. My diary tells me that the Isle of Cumbria was serving the Cumbria slip that year. And it's amazing to think in 2016 she'll be doing the same. However, 3 days later, so that would be about the 18th of May, I was up north on one of our island hops and I sailed on the Loch Nevis. The Loch Nevis, that was the 18th of May 2005, took us out to Rum and Canna, route number 1 there. Took me hours to draw these maps, by the way. I hope you appreciate it. It's funny, I was talking to one of my boys. One of my. So I've actually got one wife, okay. Been married to for 44 years. One of my daughters was over the weekend and I was putting this together. And she said, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I said, "I'm giving a talk to the Steamer Club on Wednesday." "Oh, what's about?" I said, "It's only 20 minutes long." And Fiona said, "Oh, that's not very long." And my wife said, "It is if you have to sit and listen to it." So you got a chance to hear that later, Claire. Right, okay. One of my wives. Sorry about that. Right. That was part of an island hop which I used to do with Andy and others. Just on the picture, later that trip we headed up and sailed over to Uig and back on Hebrides. So this is the Loch Nevis then in 2005, is it? Coming into Malig. I really like the Loch Nevis. It's a lovely wee ship to sail in. I wish they'd built a few more of them and could have had them in the Clyde, but that's on the James Watt dock. And just some shots. That's Egg, I think, isn't it? Or is that Canna? That's Egg. That's Egg, yes. That's a Skua and Egg. So. And heading away. This is obviously a different occasion.
You missed the boat there, by the way.
I know. So, 5 years earlier, and this is where it gets complicated, in May 2000, I was amidst another of my island hops with Gibby Anderson and Ian McLaren. I mean, we spent most of it on the Clyde. I did sail on the 15th of May 2000 and on 6 different vessels that day. We sailed on the Rover from Gourock to Kilcreggan, number 1 there. Gourock, Kilcreggan, Helensburgh, Kilcreggan, Gourock. We then sailed McElroy's Point to Hunter's Quay on the Sound of Slate. We then sailed Gourock Dunoon on Saturn. And then Dunoon, Largs, Rossi, Dunoon, Gourock on Juno. Now this is when Calmac were doing inter-resort sailings on the Clyde. And then still, we moved down the coast a bit and I think we've got another map. It's just so complicated, I can't expect to take in. We then sailed Weems Bay to Rossi on Jupiter and went up to Rabodach to sail over in the Loch Dunvegan. That was the 6th vessel. Stayed the night in Dunoon. And the next day we did it all over again. The weather was terrible this year. And Calmac, I mean, they were so poorly patronised. I mean, I always made the joke that we phoned up Gourock to say, you know, is the Juno doing her cruise? When should we arrive at Guruk? And they said, well, when can you manage? You know? I remember there was 7 passengers on it because it was a bucketing day, but we got round. We also went to Tarburton, but I haven't put all that in. So I did sail on that date in May 2000. That's actually the sea bus, but a different occasion. But we do miss the Saturn, the Jupiter, the Juno. When I first saw them, I thought they looked horrendous, but they grew on you. Just the noon's well hidden there, which is probably a good idea, but sorry. Only joking, Charlie. Right. Well, you'll be familiar with all these. Remember the days when you could get 3 ships in at Ross at the same time? The Jupiter there and Loch Ranza. She was just out from overhaul, I believe. And Waverley, of course, taken from somebody's garden up the back. So we go back further to 1995. Excuse me, to find where I am, yeah. And I sailed on the 16th of May 1995 on another island hop. And this was a wee bit unusual because we sailed from Mallaig to Castle Bay on Iona. And the following day we sailed Castle Bay to Loch Boysdale on the Lord of the Isles. There's the Iona coming into Mallaig. I always thought she was quite old-fashioned ship. She was, the bar was away down in the bills of the ship. This is her at, not the best of pictures, but this is her at Mallaig with the Loch Moor in the foreground. I couldn't find a picture of her at Castle Bay, but this is her at Mallaig. Just a couple other places she's been to, coming into Ardrossan. As Ken referred to, she did the winter service in tandem with Pioneer for a few years. And this is her at Tobermory, using her hoist. Carmack, I think for 1 year ran a service, I think it was 1992, from Tobermory to Clontyre on a Sunday. Is that right?
She came from Mallaig, yeah.
She came down from Mallaig, that's right. She went Mallaig to Tobermory, that's right, yeah. Yeah. So, 1990. And this is as far back as my diary will allow, we're probably glad to hear. This is the start of my Hebridean peregrinations, really. On the 15th of May, I did sail on a date, 1990, I sailed on Claymore from Kennaquhaig to Port Askaig and on to Colonsay and Oban. In fact, not content with that, again, this was an island hop was on. We jumped ship at Oban and then sailed for 7 hours on the Lord of the Isles out to Loch Boysdale on the Lord of the Isles, all on the same day. So this is the occasion, and that's not the best picture, sorry, that's Claymore at Port Askaig. And at Colonsay, it's a wee bit out of focus because I'm probably out of breath holding the camera to run round and get back on before they put the ropes off. And this is us once we disembarked at Oban. Here's just in the background with the Isle of Mull. Now, in an article on our website this week, John Youth accused me of talking but nothing else but the Hebridean Isles, which is not true, but I'll go on for the next hour talking about it, okay, if you don't mind. Okay, I'll be brief. Some of you may know, another highlight of 2025 is obtaining my favourite seat from the Hebridean Isles. I read that somebody had flown a drone over the ship and commented that the seat was still there, but so this is not the right seat. But for me, this is my favourite seat, the Hebridean Isles, which now sits in my garden chair. I was so annoyed that they scrapped the Hebridean Isles that I stole the bell from the Isle of Arran. I didn't really. They'd taken it off to clean it, and I said, "Can I have that for a minute?" So what's in a date? Well, quite a lot actually. Although I'm reliably informed that the ones from the co-op have been stoned. Thank you very much.